Yeah, I'm sitting here. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start with the interview, may I formally introduce Professor James Locke to this August gathering. Jim was born and raised in the small farming town of Tallmadge in Ohio. His grandparents were immigrants and no one in his family had been to college. Second of 4 children, while still schooling, Jim worked on a farm at the age of 8 as a delivery boy for the Akron Beacon Journal, as a caddy at age 11, and a stock boy at the local Sparkle Market when 14. He attended the Case Western Reserve and then moved to Stanford Medical School, both on full scholarships. He married Carolyn, and they are blessed with 3 children and 7 grandchildren. After completing his basic medical training at Stanford, he went on to do his internship, residency, and fellowship in Minnesota. He decided to do basic research in pulmonary vascular physiology, and so went to Toronto, where he did monumental work on defining the pulmonary vascular properties of the catecholamines and prostaglandins. In 1979, returning to Minnesota as a faculty, his basic research continued to thrive, and he won an Established Investigator Award from the American Heart Association, a Basil O'Connor from March of Dimes, and an RO1 from the NIH. In the early 80s, Jim did pioneering animal work on balloon dilatation of vessels and valves, paving the way for the successful application of these procedures in children. In 1983, Jim moved to the Children's Hospital in Boston, where he works till date. Under his able leadership and guidance, catheter-based therapies continue to thrive at Boston over the last 3 decades. To name a few, they did the first hybrid procedure to close VSD in the cath lab. Their group has also been on the forefront of fetal procedures on the aortic and pulmonary valve and the interatrial septum, and have done the first surgical implantation of a balloon expandable valve. Jim has been a recipient of many awards and scholarships, has served as a member on the board of various institutions and corporations. He has been a member of many committees of the Children's Hospital in Boston, the AHA, and the NHLBI. He is on the editorial board of Cardiology, the American Journal of Cardiology, Circulation, and the American Heart. He has 8 patents to his name and has published extensively and has written more than 50 chapters in different textbooks and trained many fellows who now run many of the highly successful cardiac interventional programs across the US and outside. To tell us more about his life, his aims, ambitions, and mission, and also about the people and events which influenced him, please join me, ladies and gentlemen, in welcoming today's guest of honor, Professor James Locke.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Right, Jim. So let's start with your childhood, naturally. You had a tough time, I think, in some parts of your childhood, in your school days. Can you talk through some of those memories?
Well, when I was in 2nd grade, I was suspended from school.
Why?
I broke a window and I carved in my desk.
Okay.
And then when I was in the 6th grade, I was expelled. And there is a difference between being suspended and expelled.
Okay.
The latter is rather worse for your reputation.
And what was the reason for expulsion?
I was disrespectful to the teachers.
Okay. And was there a particular reason behind the disrespect? I asked that because I was kicked out as well.
There probably was. I'm not sure I can quite remember what it was at the time.
And so how did you make a comeback from the suspension and the expulsion?
Well, both times they brought the psychologist in from the big city who interviewed me, and then I skipped the next grade.
And what was the psychologist? I ask about that because I had the same sort of psychological assessment as well. So there are some similarities coming out here.
I'm sorry to hear that, Jack.
So what was the psychological sort of opinion?
I never saw. I have no idea. Nobody ever told me. I just showed up for school the next year at a different grade.
Okay. Now, just going back a little bit further, there are some links in your parents or grandparents to England and Italy. Is that correct?
So my father's family is from West England, from Devonshire and Somerset, and my mother's family is from Italy, from Abruzzi.
Okay. And what did your parents do?
My mother was a housewife. My father was in the Navy during World War II and was selected to be sent to a technical school. And then he actually taught himself to be an engineer. And then he wound up inventing a few things and actually worked pretty extensively on the guidance system for submarine-based missiles for a defense contractor, even though he never went to college.
So how can you be a self-taught engineer in missile guidance system?
It's not very different, I think, than being a self-taught interventional cardiologist.
So that was
a lot of in common there, yeah.
And siblings?
My older brother never graduated from college, and I'm not quite sure he ever actually made a living, but right now he's working on restoring old scientific instruments for the Smithsonian. I don't think he makes money doing that, but he still lives in Talmadge, Ohio. And my sister is some sort of tree-hugging liberal scientist who works for the Cleveland Museum of Science, and she saves small arthropods in the field from extinction. And my younger brother is a fire-breathing right-wing anesthesiologist in Kentucky.
Okay, fire-breathing. Okay, and so are there any memories from school times or at home which then you can relate to having a big impact on your future life?
Probably not. No, I can't really think.
Apart from the behavior issue.
Well, my mother's family, everybody pretty much expected that I would be a doctor. I was sort of never given an opportunity to decide. All my aunts and uncles and grandparents, they were all sort of expecting me to go into medicine. I'd never met a doctor. I'm not sure I ever saw a doctor before I went to medical school.
So did you want to become a doctor then?
I didn't really know. I just did what I was told.
Yeah.
So, Jim, having come from the background that you have come from, when and why did you decide to become a doctor?
You know, I went to Stanford on a scholarship and never been to Stanford. In fact, when I went there the first time, I walked into the student union, and above the door it said the Leland Stanford Junior University, and I had no idea what a junior university was. I didn't even know. I knew about junior colleges, but I thought I made a terrible mistake in going to medical school at a junior university. Turns out that it's named after Leland Stanford's son, which most people don't know. And I wasn't at all sure I liked medical school. certainly not the first year. I had very, very good test scores, but not very good grades in my first year in medical school. But somehow I slogged my way through, at least the first couple of years.
So it was you didn't want to become a doctor, it was your parents or family that wanted you to, that's correct. But having then gone into medicine, why did you choose pediatric cardiology?
I was really very lucky, and that is that my second rotation was on Norm Shumway's cardiac surgical service at Stanford, and it was a remarkable experience, just a remarkable experience. And at that point, Shumway was attracting and training some of the best cardiac surgeons in the world, Randy Greep and Larry Cohen and a whole variety of Bruce, who went to Hopkins. And they were my residents and fellows and interns when I was a student at Stanford. And they were amazing doctors and amazing human beings. And Shumway was a remarkable person. And at the time, I was actually pretty interested in going into cardiac surgery, but I could tell I did not have the manual dexterity that those guys had. They had better eye-hand coordination for fine motor movements than I had. You know, I did what everybody did back. I would go home and I would put sutures into oranges to see how fast I could do them, but I was never as good as those guys. But nonetheless, the field was remarkable, just remarkable.
I seem to remember you're a fan of Sherlock Holmes.
Sort of, yeah, I sort of like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah. So is that what made you go into the subspecialization of pediatric cardiology?
Well, you know, there's a remarkable, Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle, I'm sure most people know this, but Arthur Conan Doyle modeled Sherlock Holmes on his professor of medical school in Edinburgh. With Bell, Joseph Bell, the guy who described Bell's palsy. And Bell, of course, created the notion that everything had to fit. If it didn't all fit, you had to keep getting more observations and more deductions in order for everything to fit. And growing up, one of the reasons I was expelled is that I would read Sherlock Holmes in the middle of class after I was done with the math, and they didn't like that. But, you know, the whole notion of making all of the data fit was very attractive as a student. And obviously in medicine, it'd be especially complex disease, right? Especially something like pediatric cardiology, where if it doesn't all fit, you have to have this nagging notion that something is wrong, that you're missing something. And it was a very successful background for trying to understand complex physiology and anatomy. I still think that's true.
Jim, after your stint in Toronto, you returned to Minnesota as a faculty.
Yes.
And things were going all good. Then what prompted you to move to Boston?
Aldo Castaneda came to Minnesota and gave a lecture. And at the time, it was a symposium, and a lot of the people there presented a fair amount of my work, and I met him for the first time. And I'm thinking that probably was 1983. And I was very impressed with Aldo also, I thought. And the problem with Minnesota at this time is that the cardiac surgical program was quite weak. They had a good cardiac surgeon who left and went across town. It was quite clear to me that my ability to push the field of interventional cardiology would be limited if I didn't have outstanding surgical help. Actually, of interest, they offered me the job to be the chief of the cath lab in Boston. And within 2 weeks, Bill Norwood flew to Minnesota, and they offered me the job to be chief of all of cardiology at Philadelphia Children's. And recognizing that lack of maturity that persists to this day, I decided that being a chief at that time was probably a mistake, so I went to run the cath lab in Boston instead. Probably the best professional decision I ever made.
Talking on the personal front, where and how did you meet Carolyn? And how did you persuade her to marry you?
I met her in freshman English in college, and she actually kept a notebook of all of my disgusting habits. She would write them all down.
Like what?
Oh, it had to do with twirling my hair and playing with my mustache and sleeping in class in the front row and interrupting the teacher. All of the things that people who know me have gotten used to over the last 30 or 40 years were present back then. None of them have changed. And I have no idea how I persuaded her to marry me.
Was it difficult?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
So what does Caroline do, and how about your children?
Carolyn, we had three kids, and when the last one left for college, she went back to school and she got a graduate degree in graphic design. She worked as a textbook designer and illustrator for about 15 years. And then when she retired from that job, she became the president, and still is the president, of the local artists association. She's a fine artist. And she's very, how best to put this, she's thoughtful and diplomatic, which of course she learned from me. And she serves on a lot of boards and is president. And she makes a good solid $1,000 a year selling her artwork around.
How about your children?
My oldest child is Barbara. She is the she's the associate chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Columbia in New York. And she has 4 children, and she's probably the most responsible person in the family, certainly more than me or my wife. And she's raised her 4 kids, and her husband's an ophthalmologist, and the youngest is, I think, probably 4 or 5 or something. The oldest is 14. And then my oldest son runs a pediatric practice in the Boston area. He actually is the chief medical officer of a startup company in addition, and they're making algorithms to predict survival after open heart surgery on ICUs. I expect I'm hoping he will break even on this venture. I don't expect he's going to make a lot of money, but he's learned a lot. And then he has a daughter, and then my youngest son has a boy and a girl, and he's the capitalist pig in the family. He works as a consultant for information technology companies.
So, Jim, I think everybody knows that you're very much larger-than-life character and have been for many, many years. And I've got personal experience with my children as well. Are your children, did they ever feel under some sort of pressure because of your reputation, your name, and everything? And how did you help them get through that?
I lied. I remember my youngest son went to school and came back when he was in 6th grade and asked me how much money I made. And I told him it was none of his business. And so then he back calculated how much money I made based on the cars that we drove and how often we went out to eat and how often we went on vacation. And of course, I basically tried to create the impression that we had no money, and I certainly pretended that we had no stat. None of them ever had any idea the extent to which I was successful until they got older. So I basically just lied to them about what we were doing and how well we were doing for a long time.
But later on then, as they developed their own career, were they affected in any way by your reputation, your name, your standing in the profession? Did they want to get out of your shadow? I
don't know. I have no idea. I certainly wouldn't let them work in my department. I wouldn't let them I strongly advised all of them not to go to Harvard. None of them went to Harvard. They went to Dartmouth and Amherst and Trinity. And I wouldn't let them work in the hospital. And I certainly was. I told all three of them if they wanted to go into cardiology, I would personally blackball them from the field and make sure they never got a job.
I still tell my children I don't have any money either, so it's very much similar to what you've done.
They figured it out about 5 years ago, but by then they were already imprinted with the poor gene.
Right. Now, why did you pick on interventions as a career, apart from you started with a lot of the basic stuff in pediatric cardiology, but why interventions? Was it, firstly, you obviously said that you were no good as a surgeon, potentially, so intervention is semi-surgical, if you like, but was it the thrills, the excitement, the glamour related to interventions?
The reason I went into interventional cardiology is that I made animal models and then fixed them in Minnesota in the 1980, 1981. The thing that's interesting about interventional cardiology is that if you push your hand in 2 centimeters, the tip of the catheter will go in 2 centimeters plus or minus a centimeter. If you rotate it 40 degrees, the tip of the catheter will rotate 40 plus or minus 20. So there is built-in hysteresis associated with being in interventional cardiology. The precision of control that you have on the tip of the catheter is dramatically less than the precision that a surgeon has when they rotate a needle holder or a hemostat. So it turns out that what's necessary, a much more important skill in pediatric interventional or any interventional cardiology field, is not precision of eye-hand coordination. It's the anticipation of what the catheter will do before it does it, and the ability to reconstruct an image three-dimensionally almost instantaneously. That's a much more important skill than eye-hand coordination. And it turns out that I had those things, and I didn't know it until I started doing catheterizations. And very quickly after I started doing catheterizations, I did a lot of them.
Jim, you have so many contributions and firsts in pediatric interventions. Which one of them, in your opinion, is the most gratifying one, and why?
Well, the one, I don't know about the most gratifying. Well, actually, I do. The one that I like the most is actually the very first one, and that is when I made animal models of branch pulmonary artery stenosis and then was able to show how angioplasty, if you remember, in 1979, 1980, nobody thought angioplasty would work in congenital heart disease because everybody was just treating atheroma and they had to be soft. So the whole notion that you could get out of atherosclerotic heart disease and into anatomic disease was completely foreign to the field. I think the most gratifying thing that I've done is the people that I've trained in over the years. I think that's the most satisfying thing.
In your career, you will have had many ups and downs, as we all do. What's the biggest high or up that you felt?
Oh, I didn't have much of that. No, I don't really recall any. I don't recall a lot of highs.
You must have got buzz out of something that you'd done and think, oh, this is great.
I'll tell you my favorite story in interventional cardiology, and that is that after we went to India and did the mitral valves, and I won the British Heart Award, the British Heart Medal, and went to York Castle to give the lecture to the British Heart Association. And afterwards, I was sitting on the platform with Jane Somerville and Walter Somerville, and Jane leaned over to me and said, "So James, dear boy, what sort of a name is Locke?" And I said, "Well, Jane, it's English. My father's English." And she said, "James, dear boy, you don't seem at all English to me." And I said, "Well, Jane, you're right. I'm half English and half Italian, and the lower half is Italian." And she said, "James, dear boy, thank God the other way is a disaster."
Okay. Well, that leads me on to ask you what your lowest point was.
Actually, the lowest point was when I failed the oral pediatric cardiology boards right out of fellowship. Yeah, I got into a fight with Bill Friedman over pulmonary vascular physiology, and he failed me.
Okay.
Now, Jim, you have been the captain and headed the institution and department at the Children's Hospital in Boston for so many years. And that's why we thought it would be a good idea for you to listen to some of your colleagues as to what they have to say. So we have picked up two of your colleagues, one from within the cath lab and one from outside. So first will be Jane Newberger. Over to you, Jane.
Jim, a student of history, you are always ahead of your time. You are a courageous and daring innovator with undistracted vision. You always consider risks, but you're not afraid to take them for the greater good. You have a breathtaking knowledge of anatomy and physiology and processing speed that is faster than lightning. These talents give you an uncanny ability to predict the future. Thank you for improving the lives of so many children with congenital heart disease, and thank you for training and inspiring a whole generation of young cardiologists.
And now from within the cath lab, so it's Audrey.
Hi, Jim. I just wanted to say thank you. I think I have the singular distinction of being the only person in the world maybe who's cathed with you for now 20 years. And considering what I might want to say to the group and to you today, it really boiled down, I think, to two things. First, I wanted to share an experience of cathing with you that most people haven't had the opportunity to enjoy. But everyone needs to appreciate how incredibly fun and exciting it is to cath with you. All this time since the beginning of my career, there's no better experience than doing a really tough case with you. I have this mental image, which is that of cartoons from the old days where a dog and a cat would get in a fight and the animator would just show this flurry of lines and dust and chaos, and an arm or a leg would come out, or a fist or a face, and at the end all of a sudden it would be done and everything would be fine and there would be a victor, and at the end of the case that was usually you, and everything was okay again and the chaos was gone and something had happened. And that's sometimes how it felt to cath with you, and it was just always fun. Watching you walk into a room and tease the techs and the fellows and then just dig into it was incredible.
And Jim, you have trained so many interventionists who are now scattered all over the world. And so we have picked up on one of your fellows from outside United States, and he will give you what he thinks about you. So it's KK.
Bharat and Shaq, thanks for this opportunity. To those who have not worked with Jim, he's a pioneer. Someone who's definitely pushed the limits and shown us all the way forward. Yet, in many ways, Jim is still an enigma, a mystery, a genius. Jim is someone who only thinks out of the box. Every situation is individualized. Innovation and improvisation happen at every step. This is possible because he has an exceptionally strong foundation in cardiac anatomy and hemodynamics. He has a 3D roadmap of every possible lesion firmly programmed in his brain. His understanding of cardiac catheter hardware is simply phenomenal. And you add to this mix astute clinical judgment, sheer guts, exceptional hand-eye coordination, and an uncanny sixth sense, and you have all the ingredients that go into making of a legend.
Now, Jim, we come to that part of the interview which we call as a rapid fire, so as to just get a bird's eye view of your personality. So it has to be a quick answer and a spontaneous one.
Okay.
Okay, so there we go. You are an idol to so many. Who is your idol?
Probably Aldo Castaneda.
Your favorite sport?
Basketball.
Your favorite sportsman?
I don't have one. Growing up, it was Rocky Colavito. He was a baseball player in Cleveland.
Your most favorite movie?
I don't watch a lot of movies. I haven't watched them in a long time. I'd have to think about that one.
Movie star?
Movie star. Yeah, same thing. I don't do movies.
What about your favorite song?
I liked The Bridge Over Troubled Waters by Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel.
And your favorite pastime? Your favorite pastime?
Pastime right now, building stone walls.
Your favorite city?
Boston.
Your favorite cuisine?
Cuisine.
Right now, well, Italian and Japanese.
All right. Name of your first girlfriend?
God, what was that girl's name?
You have to think about her name now.
Yeah, this was a long time ago. She had beautiful legs, though. Really beautiful legs.
All right, you can't remember the first girlfriend. You can't remember the first girlfriend. What about the second girlfriend's name?
That was Linda.
Okay.
Linda.
All right. Now, if you had to describe yourself to everybody in one sentence, how would you describe yourself?
Honest, self-critical, and altruistic.
Your plans for the future?
I've never had plans. I don't have any plans for the future. I'll show up and do what shows up.
Okay. If you had to if you were given the opportunity to turn the clock back right to the beginning, how would you relive your life?
I would have used a smaller balloon on the patient that Roberta Williams sent with truncus, who had an obstructed arch and a shunt that was too small. And I used too big a balloon, and he bled into his lungs a massive amount. And I would have used a longer covered stent in the POTS patient that I did 6 years ago when the stent was too short. And I would have worked harder to open up the subclavian vein and the transposition, who eventually died from too much leakage. And, I carry around, I suppose most of us do, carry around the memories of those mistakes that you made over the years. And I think one of the most important things that I try to do is not make that same mistake, but try not to let my colleagues make it for the first time.
If you wound the clock back further still, would you have gone into medicine?
Oh, yeah.
Still.
And I would have gone into, I would have done this for free.
Pediatric cardiology.
I just can't imagine a better way of making a living than the way most of us make a living.
So how would you like to be remembered?
Honest, self-critical, and altruistic.
So lastly, Jim, would you like to give a message to the budding interventionists? What message would you like to give them?
If you're going to do something that's never been done before, you need to be very prepared to do that. You have to think about it a lot. You have to model things out. You have to make animal models whenever possible. You have to consider you have to pick your first patient very carefully. And you have to succeed on your first patient. And you have to build a team of support in your institution before you try to do something that's never been done before. You probably won't know if you can do this for a living until you've had a hand in either causing the death of or a serious morbid problem in your first patient on your own. And you won't know if you can do this for a living until you figure out what you will do when you wake up the next morning after that case, because that is the hardest thing to overcome, the sense of failure that harmed somebody else, and it allows you to continue to work. You won't know if you can do that until that's happened to you.
So with that, Jim, we conclude this interview. On behalf of the Board of Directors of the CSI, we wish to thank you for fielding a volley of questions so very frankly and candidly. We would also like to wish you a very long, productive, healthy, and happy life. May you continue with your mission of training and teaching the young minds for a long time to come. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. No, hold on, Jim. Yeah. Jim, this is a Lifetime Achievement Award on behalf of CSI Foundation, so thank you very much. Everybody highly appreciates all your work over the years. Big hand for Jim.